So welcome back to week 2, CV, letter of intent, and LinkedIn. This is going to be a 2-part series. This first week, we're going to focus on structure and design. And then the next week, which is in 2 weeks, we'll focus on the content of your CV, your letter of intent, and LinkedIn. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to start off defining what a professional CV looks like, the importance of having a well-structured CV. Then we're going to talk about how to structure and define your CV, and I'm going to kind of walk you through a method that I used when I was going through this process. That was pretty easy. And then the grayed out agenda items are for next week, where we talk about content, letter of intent, and LinkedIn. All right, so a bit of interaction to get us started. Go ahead and drop in the chat, or if you're brave enough, get off mute and shout out, what you guys think makes a professional CV.
I would say it's professional because it highlights your educational and work experiences. So that's what makes it professional.
Something that nicely highlights your expertise and experiences. I see in the chat, precision, grammar, and correct spelling.
Readable.
Readable, what do you mean?
Like not too small of a font and not too big of a font. It's kind of get that perfect balance.
Nice one. I see an interesting one in the chat by Nkechi about PDF versus Word doc. We're actually going to talk about that today when it comes to formatting your CV. So I'm glad you brought that up. We're going to hold that thought for a little bit. But some other ones I see, user-friendly, easily transferable, all great things. Let me go ahead and move on. So well-structured, making sure that it's appealing to the eye, use of non-bright colors, formatting that shows, of course, your personality, but also that you're professional. It should be dependent on your role, which is something I'm going to talk about a bit later, right? Usually when you're talking about role dependency, you're talking about the content of your CV. I'm going to show you how to structure your CV dependent on the role in which you're applying for. It needs to be easy to navigate so that your information is easy to locate for the hiring manager or recruiter. Second thing that was mentioned a couple times, grammar, making sure that it's grammatically correct. And typically when students hear grammar, they think about spelling errors or punctuation, but taking it a step further, verbosity, right? When having what can be written concisely in one sentence, written in 4 to 5 bullet points, or even a paragraph, right? You wanna make sure that although your CV is detailed, it is very concise. And then of course, your language should be at a high learning level, right? So you're not gonna use words like I did this, or I did stuff. You want to be very detailed and use language that is of a doctorate degree holder, which you guys all will be in a few months. And of course, avoiding errors in spelling, grammar, and punctuation. And the third one, having relevant content. Making sure that your experience isn't only detailed to show, okay, I filled prescriptions or I counseled the patient, but making sure that experience has value. So what was the purpose of you counseling that patient? What value does that add to the position which you're applying for? Your CV should tell a story in reverse chronological order. And it should incorporate all levels of experience that are grouped appropriately by date. And then for this conversation, again, we're going to focus on structure. The other two we'll talk about in excruciating detail in our next session. But for now, we're going to talk about how to structure and format your CV professionally. So any questions before I dive on into the good stuff? Cool.
Yeah, there are questions.
Oh, okay. I can't see them. So,
okay, well, just one. Are we talking about a CV or resume?
So I talk about CV primarily, but there are instances where I refer mainly to that I refer to resumes, like as far as like how many pages and stuff like that. So I do provide examples for both. And yes, by definition, a CV is lengthy or a lengthier version of your resume. It's a curricular vitae, a list of all your experiences, academic achievements. But when I say being concise, I mean, instead of like talking around an experience, you're getting to the point, right? And showing the value as opposed to talking in a book. Getting to the point is what I mean when I'm talking about being concise, not the overall length of the CV. All right, so why does structure matter? And this is actually something I saw while scrolling through Instagram the other day. I think a lot of us on this call follow this page. And this is kind of like, why structure matters, right? Avoiding situations like this. The interviewer asks, can you explain the gap in your CV? And the candidate responds, well, I spent 6 hours formatting it in Google Docs, and he opened it in Word. So now there's like gaps and misalignments and wrong indentations and all that stuff. And essentially, this is why structure and formatting matters when you're developing your CV, to avoid situations like this. And then more specifically, why it's important to have a well-structured CV, because an unstructured one can portray as someone that lacks preparedness or attention to detail, or overall just makes you look unprofessional. It is the main resource that recruiters and hiring managers will use to determine if they even want to extend you an interview or not. So it's important that you really use this as a first chance to make a good impression to your potential employer. Oh, and then throughout this slide deck, I put in some pro tips just for you guys to kind of take note of. Take it or leave it as advice. And our first pro tip of the evening is that your CV should paint a picture of who you are as a candidate. So just make sure you autograph your work with quality. And that goes from, the overall structure to grammar to the content. Just overall make sure that your CV is nice quality. All right, so for the remainder of the slide deck, I kind of divided it into 4 sections when we're talking about structuring your CV. The first thing we're going to talk about is how to identify what sections to include or the length of your CV. And there's kind of 3 areas that I want to talk about to determine your CV sections. One is your understanding of the role. You want to understand the requirements and responsibilities for the role that you're applying for, and make sure that your CV reflects what the job is looking for. Right, so if a job description is saying, oh, well, they require you to have a PhD or a PharmD or MD, it lets you know that your education needs to be up and center, highlighted. Your education background, like, what degrees you were able to obtain within that school. If they say you need to have a certain amount of years of experience, that's going to determine how many relevant work experience and additional work experience you need to also include in your CV. When they say, okay, what types of experience you need to have, that's also going to determine how long your CV should be, right? Because if they're saying, well, they want you to have, hard skills that actually pertain to the role, like, for example, if you're applying for marketing, you want you to have experience in Viva and Crossix, that's like actual hard skills, or soft skills like collaboration and leadership, and that maybe pull from other experiences that may not be directly relevant to the position, but may support the position which you're applying for. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail on that a bit later too, and then in our next session in 2 weeks. The second part that determines the length or your CV sections is the overall length. As a general rule, I don't recommend going beyond 3 pages for your CV. And this can vary, right? So if you're doing a residency program, I would say 3 to 4 pages is okay. And if you're doing, a full-time position with an employer, I would say to stay around the 2 to 3 pages mark. And here's why. If you just dump all the experience you've done since birth, including undergraduate and even high school level experiences that may not be relevant to the position, it can show a lack of focus and really cause fatigue and confusion for the interviewer or the person that's reviewing your CV. It'll be hard to determine what experiences you're trying to highlight versus what you're just putting there for, completion's sake. And one, point I want to, point out as well is, like, last year when I was interviewing candidates for mid-year, what I would do when I'm trying to stump a candidate, and maybe it's just me, right? But I've seen people do this as well when I went through mid-year, is they will ask questions on page 5 out of 6 of your CV just to see if you can recall what you put there, right? So it leaves room for more questions during the interviews. And if you don't have a strong grasp of the content that you put there and the level of experience and how it's relevant to the position, it may, lead to your detriment as opposed to supporting you and making like a stronger candidate. So the last thing, and it's pretty like a point, is your experiences, right? Determines the length and the sections that you'll have in your CV. So, if you have more years of experience, you'll have a longer CV. If you have fewer years of experience, you have a shorter CV. If you've done research, then you'll have a research section. If you haven't done research, then you wouldn't have it. So it's just based off what you have done that will determine what sections you'll include your CV. And then it'll all tie into, like, how it's relevant to the role and what you're trying to highlight per the job description. All right, so going over the sections to include. Before I go to the next section, any questions? Again, just hop off mute or throw them in the chat.
You can hear me, right? Just to be sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, perfect. So I've sent in my resume. I'm sorry, I've sent in my CV for review multiple times over the years, and I've gotten very different opinions about this. So I guess just to ask, so let's say you put your role, right? You put the title, the header, and where you worked, and all the typical header stuff, and then you put all like your responsibilities or like a description of the job. And you know how some like one description of something you did can be a long sentence, and other ones can be summarized in just a few words. But if you have like a couple bullets, like it's varying lengths. I've heard sometimes what you want to do is to make your CV look better. Try to make the sentences towards the end the same length. That way it just looks like a symmetrical block instead of jagged edges. And I've gotten different opinions about that. So I wanted to see what you had to say about that, just to make it look better. It's a small thing, but it's something that matters, I guess.
Yeah, so for me, I'm going to show you an example of both actually later on. But for me, it depends, right? Because there's two things on it. One thing I would say is like overall for your bullet points, and any mentors that are on the call, if you have opposing views, by all means, come off feed and share. But for me, I would say that each bullet point should not exceed 2 lines, right? So if you have one experience that is a bit more detailed, it may be a bit longer than, bullet 2, which is like, more concise and shorter, and you were to, shrink it into one little box, and now bullet 1 is 3 or 4 lines versus bullet 2 being 1 line. I don't think that looks good, right? Because it looks like you're reading a paragraph and then it's a bit too varying, right? So I would just do what works best overall for the look and feel of your CV. Me personally, I don't mind the jagged lines, or I don't think I care too much for it being a symmetrical box, and that's just my preference. But anyone else, feel free to share theirs.
Yeah, I'll come in quickly. In regards to that, I think you should just be intentional with what you're writing instead of be consistent. So let's say you're applying to a fellowship and you've had experience at a CVS pharmacy for 2 to 3 years, and you think it's relevant to put on your CV still. I would only put a one-liner for that versus anything more than 1 line for a CVS when you're applying to like a pharmaceutical company and you have all these other experiences that are more relatable would not be beneficial to you. And I do agree with Nkira that more than 2 lines is probably too much. But if you, just to summarize, if you have an experience on there that you want to still have on there, even though it's not as applicable or relevant to the role, keep it very short and sweet with a one-liner.
Thank you.
And then just one comment on the thing you just said about CVS. I think everything depends. If you did some really good experience at CVS that can show, maybe if you're applying to a marketing fellowship or whatever the case is, that you have a business mind because you did some kind of cost benefit analysis, and I think that is a meaningful experience, right? But if you're talking about, I filled scripts all day, and you want to make that 3 lines, and of course, I would say there's better experiences you can serve to highlight if you're looking to apply for a fellowship.
Exactly.
Can I add one more thing to that? I agree with both. I think that when I read CVs or when I review CVs, if you put on like your job description, like going back to the CVS example, if you're putting on like the things that you're paid to do or you're supposed to do, great, but how you can make it even better if you do things that differentiate you. So if you applied with the CVS or Walgreens background, chances are like that's a cool experience, but everybody else is going to have that same experience. And same even with rotations, right? If you spent a month at Pfizer, okay, you want to put in there what you accomplished that makes you different. Don't do like I attended meetings. Like, of course you did. That's what you were supposed to do. So your CV is really a cool document where you can flex. This is how I'm different. This is how I'm unique, and look to highlight those experiences. And they make great talking questions because when I interview candidates, that's what I go off of. I have nothing else. I don't go on LinkedIn and try and find out what you've been up to and what cool things you're doing. My talking points come from your CV. So make it easy for me to make you look good in an interview when you're in a panel format, and I can highlight, hey, you did X, Y, and Z. That's a really cool experience. Tell me about more. Tell me about that, like more. Sorry, just wanted to add that.
I agree. And then that topic about, how you're describing your content and making sure that it's relevant and meaningful will be discussed in excruciating detail in our next session. But thank you guys for chiming in. I see a couple other questions in the chat. When it comes to leadership experience, is it best to leave out the description to allow discussion during interviews, or should it be left in the CV for clarity, asking for fellowships? And again, I think this is more of an opinion thing, so mentors, feel free to come off mute and chime in. But I can answer that real quickly. For me, it depends on your experience, right? So if you're a candidate that has a ton of internship experience, like you've just been on your top of it since like your P1 year, you have a lot of things you can talk about, then I probably wouldn't go into too much detail my leadership experience. But if you're someone like me, who started pretty late and just didn't have much other, farm related experience to talk about, then what you did in your leadership experiences will be beneficial and helpful to you to, one, include on your CV, written out, and also to talk about again in interviews.
What would you go about with someone who didn't, like, I applied for multiple, like, industry internships. I got to like the last round, and me as a P3, I didn't really get the opportunity or blessed to get like, industry internship. So what is the best advice you can give for a P3 to like, try to outshine their competitors, like, or to try, to put on their CV to outshine their competitors during the time when I decide to apply for fellowships?
Yes, I can answer that really quickly, and just to make sure we're not going too far off topic, because this is more so about the content of what is on your CV now, which we're going to talk about in details with your mentors in our next session next week. But just like really quickly to address your question, because it does sound like you're someone like me that just, didn't have internships and stuff like that. What you're gonna have to leverage are your APPE rotations, your leadership experiences. Even if you had, a retail job where you're working as an intern, find projects throughout that job like that can speak to whatever role you're looking to apply for within industry. If you're looking to go the medical route or something that's a bit more clinical, look to get onto research projects, shows your collaborativeness and you're a clinical expert. You have to find other ways around it that speaks to different aspects of the job description. And I promise you, Alexis, like week 3 will be super detailed on like, how you can navigate that. And if you want, you can also just reach out to me personally and I can talk to you a bit more how you can kind of finesse your experiences to make yourself a stronger candidate. But I do want to focus on, more so structural questions and how to format your CV for this week.
Sorry, I just had to ask that before I forget.
You're cool. Like, just feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. So general sections that, are typically included in your CV. I listed about 8 of them that most candidates have. Again, this varies depending on what position you're applying for, if it's a residency or a fellowship, just whether or not you want to include or not. I highlighted a couple of them in purple, which are probably a bit newer to some of you students, and I want to kind of highlight and talk them through. But the sections that I've included are executive summary, expertise or keywords, your educational background, work experience, leadership, projects and research, awards and recognition, and professional membership. Again, the 3 that are highlighted in purple, we're going to dive into a bit more deeply. And then I just kind of showed it against a sample CV. This is actually one of my older ones that I used a while back. The general sections to include, you see how it's kind of laid out. Your executive summaries towards the top, expertise and keywords right underneath it, your education, relevant experience, and etc. All right, so executive summary. So this is going to be a very short statement at the top of your CV that quickly summarizes what makes you the right candidate for the job. Right? And not all people have this included on their CV or their resume, but I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why I think it might be beneficial for you guys that are on this call or just PharmDs in general that are looking to apply to non-traditional paths. So one, it quickly articulates your value, right? It's going to be the first thing that recruiters see when they look at your CV or your resume right after your name, your contact information. And as such, it'll be the most time that they spend looking on that page because it's page number 1. It should include the most important information that demonstrates how you are uniquely, and I'm going to emphasize uniquely qualified for the job, which I'm going to go into a bit more detail on this point, right? So it's going to make you stand out from the crowd. It's going to emphasize your strengths while highlighting your transferable skills. And what I mean when I say this is that, so when you're going for these different jobs, right, you're going for a fellowship. Everyone on this call has a PharmD. Some of you guys have an MBA, maybe an MPH, but you guys are pretty much at the same degree level when you're coming as a candidate. When you have your executive summary, what it serves to do is has you pull in experiences or skills or expertise that may not be clearly defined throughout the rest of your resume, right? So it can, go beyond the job qualifications and really set you apart from the candidates that share your similar background. And I'm going to show you an example of what I mean, give you an example of an executive summary that I used in the past. But then the third reason is that it's targeted towards a specific job and aligns you with employer needs. I think some of you guys on this call may be familiar with what they call an objective summary. In the past, a lot of candidates would have an objective summary at the top of their CV or their resume. And what that is it tells the employer or the hiring manager what it is that you as a candidate are looking for in a company. So it'd be something like, I'm a distinguished or experienced marketer seeking an innovative company that shares values in this, that can do this, that values this. So it's everything that you are looking for in a job. However, an executive summary differs because it is you basically answering the APV of the company, right? So you're sharing why you are a distinguished candidate for the job in which you're applying for. And when I show you the example, it'll be a bit more clear what I'm talking about. Oh, before we go there, we have our second pro tip. An executive summary will hook the hiring manager and make them want to read more about you. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with what an anecdote is. I'm sure everyone here has taken the SATs. And when you're writing an essay, an anecdote is the very beginning part of the story that serves to engage your audience and your readers. So it's like a super exaggerated story that pulls you in and draws you in. I want you to think of your executive summary of as the anecdote of your CV or resume. It's going to be what draws in the recruiters, draws in the hiring managers, makes them want to read more to see, how is this person innovative? How is this person a leader? It's going to make them want to continue looking over your CV, and then as a result, hopefully extending you an interview. All right, so here's an example of one that I used a while back. So I'm just going to read it to you guys. A motivational and hands-on leader with a natural ability to develop valuable, inclusive relationships with healthcare providers. Utilizes a winning combination of a robust clinical background and strong command of marketing principles to provide organizations with a partner that truly knows the landscape. Consistently takes the lead on strategic initiatives important for productivity and bottom line success. Celebrated for never-ending passion for patient engagement and supporting teams to provide overall value in the patient marketing landscape. So this now changes the scenario from me just being a PharmD candidate with an MBA. Now I'm someone that's a leader. I'm someone that's hands-on. I'm someone that understands the business, that drives, most businesses' bottom line. I'm someone that, I confirm the fact that I'm a clinical expert given my PharmD background, but I've taken it a step further and said that I'm so much more than just that. And if you read the rest of my CV, you'll see just how. So it's supposed to be something that kind of draws everyone in. Any questions on an executive summary before I go on to the next area? All right, expertise or keywords. So keywords help your CV to catch the eye of a recruiter, hiring manager, and they should be strategically placed throughout your resume to avoid what they call keyword stuffing. So this may not apply so much for those of you that are looking to apply to fellowships and residencies, but for those of you who are looking to apply for full-time positions and that are maybe using a resume as opposed to a CV, this may be applicable to you. So it may not be applicable if those are applying to fellowships and residencies, but more so for candidates that are applying to full-time roles. Because usually when you submit your resume for a job, they have like this automated machine that kind of captures, that'll basically sift through resumes on file to see, okay, they take the first pass at it. So if you don't have certain keywords on job description, you're immediately eliminated as a candidate. If you do, you get looked at by actual person, then decide if you go on an interview or not. So just making sure that some of these keywords are included so that you're not, immediately cut off from the candidacy pool. Some tips on keywords and using them in your CV. One is be specific. Include keywords that are as closely related to the job as possible, including your skills, competencies, credentials, and past experiences and employers. Make sure that you know the job, right? So you're not just going to use keywords that you think make sense to you as a PharmD looking to go into pharma. No, you're going to use key words that are directly aligned to the job description. Where on the job description can you find them? It'll probably be in the qualification and responsibility section. So really study the job. I'm gonna just say JD for job description, so that you can pull out those keywords and have them sprinkled throughout your resume so that you aren't, canceled prematurely. Use as many as possible, right? Make sure you have touched on most, if not all. But I will say this one caveat: don't claim what you can't do. Don't use a keyword if you don't have that skill. Don't say that you are an expert in Viva and Crossix if you have no idea what that is. At that point, you're just risking your integrity, and it makes you look worse than better. The last thing I'm going to say about keywords is, have them sprinkled throughout. For me, I tend to hide them so I showed you my old CV where I had an actual section for expertise in keywords. Now I don't do that anymore. I kind of just have it sprinkled throughout my executive summary as well as throughout my job descriptions. And that's what I recommend for you guys. If you guys don't have an executive summary, which is totally cool, have them included throughout your job descriptions. Certain words that again can be found on the qualifications and responsibilities. And then before I go on to the example of how the keywords and expertise can be included, let me just address Benjamin's question. For an LOI, can you use your executive summary in a different way? For your letter of intent, can you use, what do you mean in a different way? Sorry.
Oh, hi, it's Ben. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So what I mean is, so like letter of intent, you're supposed to like show what you can get out of a program, fellowship program, and then also what you can provide. So it seems to me like an executive summary is sort of like that exaggerated story about your experiences that you can provide to the position. So I was wondering if it's also in your CV, but also in your LOI, is that?
Oh, you're saying like to copy and paste it, basically.
Yeah.
I would recommend against doing that. It just shows laziness. It doesn't take too much to craft a pretty decent executive summary. I would just do it, honestly, my opinion.
Yeah, thanks.
What I would say though is that the executive summary where you could probably reuse it would be in your LinkedIn account. But I wouldn't do it on my LOI, my letter of intent, and my CV that I'm submitting to the same employer. All right, so an example. Again, I've moved away from doing it this way, but here are examples of some keywords that align to positions I've been applying to in the past, marketing. So you guys can kind of just look at it. This slide deck will also be available in the Google Drive to you guys, as well as this lecture being recorded. I'm not going to spend too much time going through each of these keywords, but they're here for you guys to refer back to. All right, work experience. So for the sake of this presentation, right, that we're preparing for mid-year and we are students looking to do fellowships, residencies, I'm talking specifically to you guys. I'm going to say, let's not call it work experiences. Let's eliminate the word work and just call it experience. Why? Because when students typically hear work experience, they only think of experience that they got paid to do. And that is not the only experience that matters when you're drafting your CV and your resume. And the way I kind of like go about doing it is I divide into two buckets. One is relevant experience and one is additional experience. Again, this can be any experience that has been paid or unpaid. For relevant experiences, these are experiences that directly align with the roles of the job position you're applying for, right? So for a fellowship, it will be any kind of pharma work experiences, paid internships, unpaid internships, any relevant API rotations that directly align to the fellowship in which you're applying for. For residency, that may be something like a hospital internship, paid or unpaid, and any actual clinical working experience. And I guess when I wrote the residency, I was only thinking in a clinical mindset, but there are retail residencies as well. So a relevant work experience for a retail residency would be obviously working at CVS, Walgreens, or in the retail setting. Same thing for ambulatory, working in the ambulatory setting. So they directly align to the position which you're applying for. When we talk about additional experience, these don't necessarily directly speak to the core function of the role in which you're applying for. They're more so supportive. So these can speak to like your softer skills, like you are a leader, or that maybe you're a clinical expert, or that you're able to balance, a high working environment because you've taken on so much over time. And these examples are your jobs that you probably did in undergraduate or even on the side in pharmacy schools, like an RX tutor or a store manager at a beauty supply store, which I did during pharmacy school.
Oh, question.
Mm-hmm.
So, say you want to like prioritize the real estate of your CV and put everything that's like relevant to the industry fellowship position that you want to apply for in the first page.
Mm-hmm.
How would you go about it? If it's like a leadership position, or yeah, if it's a leadership position.
You're saying your relevant work experience with a leadership experience or leadership position. I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, because you have APPEs, and so it's
Mhm.
like a lot of text, and so logically, if it's like chronological, or I just feel like APPEs first, and then leadership ends up being in the second page, so it'd be okay to like mix and match, in a sense,
You're saying to mix your leadership experience or your
with the
leadership.
relevant, yeah, with the APPEs, yeah.
I would not do that. I'm sure if you have relevant pharma experience, you can also tie into how you were a leader in those roles. And then from there, I would go into, I would do my leadership. Like, are your leadership experiences like, what you've done, like you're president of NCPA, like stuff like that throughout school?
Oh, it's like a business plan lead for NCPA. So I was in a business plan team, so I was trying to highlight that. I'm not sure if that's totally relevant, but
I mean, I'd have to see honestly what you're looking to apply for in your whole thing, but just in general, right? I think you're relevant. If your experience and your relevant work experience, your relevant experiences are better than your leadership experience, then you'll lead with that. It's just based off how you're prioritizing what experiences you think are more eye-catching. I wouldn't really look to mix or interweave them through unless it makes sense to do so. Actually, I wouldn't do it. I would just separate the two.
yeah, appreciate it.
Ooh, and then here is a pretty busy example, just showing you how I have relevant experiences here and then additional experiences here on the right-hand side. So although, so an example being that I'm looking to apply for a pharma marketing position, my relevant experience would be working at Bayer as a fellow on their marketing team. That's the most relevant experience I have for the job role I'm applying for. And then additional experience will be experiences working within the industry still with IQVIA. What I do at other arcs, that shows my leadership and still my business mindedness, and then FDA to show also some supporting knowledge of the regulatory process and drug ad promo. All right, so Princess, you had a question about what colors are appropriate to do in your CV. For me, I would say avoiding bright colors in general. Some people say avoid using colors altogether, just use black ink, because some people are colorblind. Just in general, like, use colors that are neutral, not super bright, not hard to read against the white background, and that basically makes your CV look clean. So don't use like bright pink, bright oranges and stuff like that, very neutral colors. All right, so some layout examples. So I kind of showed these screenshots throughout the presentation. I'm going to go into a bit more detail in a few about how to actually construct some CVs. But so this is like a basic view, right? More standard view that I used for mid-year, etc. So my profile at the top, expertise, which I kind of moved away from doing in the future, my education, relevant work experience, and then below I would have leadership, additional work experiences, etc. Issues with the way this is looking, it looks very crowded, not a lot of white space. I think it was Cecile or Cecil, you had a comment about the lines being jagged. This is kind of how I did it in the future and still how I do it now. I'm probably never going to switch to making it super bulky, but this is kind of one option about doing it. And then the second option, dividing the entire page into 2 columns to make it look a bit more clean, a bit more uniform, more white space. Brought the expertise there, credentials, technical, portfolio, education, we move down to the bottom, because at this stage in the game, I think it's more pertinent for me to highlight my actual experience in my roles versus the degrees that I have or the letters I have behind my name, because I have a lot more experience now. And then again, I have my relevant experience, and then additional experience falls on the next page. Just like some options when you guys think about how you guys want to craft your CVs. And then we have a third pro tip. The layout of your CV should be in logical order with sufficient spacing, clear section heading. So you can see the difference from option 1 to option 2, the layout and how my CV is. When you have your dates, lay them out in chronological order, of course, starting with the most recent items in the first list for each section. All right, so now we're gonna go into how to create your own CV. So there are kind of like a couple ways you can do it, right? You can go on Word and, you know, find a template and go out with it. You can Google some templates to use, and those are pretty helpful as well. But the problem with some of those things is that when you transfer it from, let's say, Word to PDF, or depending on what you know, document file you're using, it may not transfer the correct way or the way that you intend. Someone had a question or had a comment earlier about, you know, the use of PDF versus Word doc or a native file when creating your CV. What I'm going to say to that comment is that for mid-year, absolutely, I recommend you guys all use PDFs just to ensure that there's no issues with your formatting, there's no breaks in your paragraphs or indentation or anything like that. But when you are applying for full-time positions, your employer will state whether they want a CV, whether they want a PDF or a Word doc or whatever file type they want. And that's when it gets tricky. We're not allowed to submit a PDF as your file. Ladea has a question: where should our future app rotations fall on our CV? So I hate to say this, but it really just depends on what your experience is, right? Because it varies by person. If you don't have that really great additional work experience, then this can come before then. If you have additional work experience that's like, you know, really good to the position, then you may want to put that up and put this below there. But it just depends on what experience you have and how it ties into the role you're applying for. I don't want to give a one-size-fits-all answer because everyone's situation and background are different, and it'll probably be easier when we sit down with our mentors one-on-one to kind of say, okay, based off your credentials and what you're applying for, this is how it should be formatted and in what order. So Ladea, sorry, but it honestly depends. But back to the table method really quickly so I can share my screen again and show you guys how to actually format it. It's the use of the table feature on Word documents to construct the CV. Why am I using a table to make my CV? To ensure consistent formatting of CV across document file types. And Cecil, I don't know if I'm saying your name wrong, I'm so sorry, or Cecile, if you are worried about, you know, having your lines formatted and structured appropriately, this would be a great way to ensure that, you know, you don't have those jagged edge lines and that your CV is as structured as possible. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing for a quick second so I can show you guys a different screen, and let me know if you guys can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is what the table method looks like. This CV was constructed using a table on Microsoft Word. It's not a full CV because it's super lengthy to do right now. I just wanted to show you guys what it looks like. So if you were to remove the borders, this is what it would look like, right? You have your profile, your executive summary, your expertise, your education, and your relevant work experience, kind of just at the what I included. For these lines, if it does bother you people, some of you guys on the call, it's a really quick and easy fix. I'm gonna put the lines back on, and I'll show you how you guys can go ahead and do that. It'll basically, you'll just, instead of merging these files in this cell together, you would split it back into 2 columns. And just for the sake of this, I'm gonna just delete this right now, so that your words don't cross over to where your date and stuff is. So you'll have a full column for just your date. Does that kind of make sense? So let me show you guys how to actually construct it. So you go to Insert, Table, and you start off with just 2 columns all the way down. And the way I typically do it, so I kind of have in my head like what layout I'm going for, what I'm looking to have. If you want to have an executive summary, you would start off with merging these 2 cells together. And for every cell that's like a title, it'll be merged together. So this will be exec summary, kind of like how I had there the first time. This will be your next header. We'll go to education. And then this second column will serve for like your dates. So I would push it all the way over here and your dates will be written. And then adjusted to the right side so that your dates stay here, stay formatted throughout the thing. And as you go through, you can just fill it out, merging when necessary for headers and for different descriptions. And that's how you kind of come up with this table up here. And then when you're done, you just select it all and you remove all of the borders, all of the borders of the table. And when you take this to PDF, to Word doc, if you email it, it's going to stay within that same exact structure. Any questions on that? And I'm sorry if I breezed through it. It was just very difficult to try to stay within time and we kind of started late. So any questions on that? How did I push over the sides to the date? What do you mean? Like, how did I make this towards the right-hand side? If that's what you're asking, so you can just take like your paragraph, right? You can have it either centered, you can have it towards the right side margin, but for the date, you typically want it towards the left margin. And that's how you would do it for your date. You would just keep them all over there on that side. Your education would be here. That would be your topic summary. And then from there, you'll list what school you went to, Bethune-Cookman. And then you'll list your degrees here in bullets.
So, hi, yeah, no, my question was, you see like that line that you moved? Yes.
This line.
I missed, like, how did you move that from where it was in the center all the way over to the side like that?
Yeah, so if you just like go over it, you'll see like these two lines appear with the arrows on the side, and you just drag it.
Okay, you dragged it. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions on this table? I'm glad you guys are well receiving it. It was definitely a lifesaver for me when I went through mid-year. But this will ensure that your CV stays structured when you take it to different file formats. Great, so I'm gonna go back to the deck just for a couple more slides and then we're gonna wrap up. All right, so key things to take away from this slide deck. One, the importance of having a well-structured CV. It's the main resource that recruiters can use to determine if they want to interview or not. And if it's not well-structured, you look unprofessional. The second thing, when you're determining your layout, you want to consider what the job is asking you for, the length of your CV. Again, that varies depending on what position you're applying for and your personal experience, basically what you even have, the materials that you have to essentially make this recipe that is your CV. The last thing, a quick and easy way to develop your CV so that it is well formatted despite the different document files that you take it into is to just use the table method. Again, this lecture will be recorded, so afterwards, if I went a bit too quickly in going over it, feel free to rewatch it and also reach out to us if you have any questions on that. Before I close you guys out, just some updates for week 3 section. Make sure that you guys finish reading the CV chapter in Farm Fellows, in the Farm Fellows book. And I want you guys to all take a first stab at creating your CVs. If you haven't done so already, that is. If the table format was helpful, I want you guys to try to take a stab at using that. If you guys already have your own structure template available, by all means, knock yourself out. Mentors, I want you to challenge your mentees to present their CV using various document file types, so PDFs, Word docs, have them email it to you to see if it still maintains the same formatting. And also mentees, be sure to contact your mentors to set up your one-on-ones. I just wanna make sure I stress that it's not your mentor's responsibility to reach out to you guys to schedule it. It's up to you guys to reach out to them. And our next group session will be September 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. So before I close you guys out, any questions on anything that we've talked about today or what's to come? And here's all our contact information here. If you ever want to reach any of us, our Instagram is @rexcellence_, LinkedIn @rexcellence, website brexcellence.com. Email rexcellence.info@gmail, and then you can contact Farm Fellows via our email as well. But if you want to get in touch with their book, farmfellows.com. Thank you all for attending and being super patient with all the technical difficulties. Again, it is recorded for you guys to refer back to if I did happen to zoom through things. It's always a pleasure, and I will see you guys in a few weeks.